All right, click the links, join the channel here over at Subscribe Star, or buy me a coffee. Thanks to everyone who has. So whenever I read one of these SOYBOY articles, I click on the guy's name and you see his little bio, and they look exactly like you expect them to look with this stupid little, usually a picture of them holding a cup of coffee up, their favorite coffee mug. I love coffee. It's like, yeah, everyone does. Stop. If you've seen it 1,000 times, just stop with these. I mean, just take a normal picture instead of looking like I'm so artsy fartsy. Aren't I clever and creative? No, you're just a soy boy who's trying to pretend to be clever and creative, but you're coming across honestly kind of creepy, like some Podesta type of vibe. Anyway, so Brandon Sanderson, who's a fantasy author, asks his fans to calm down after getting slammed by this insane self-hating soy boy for a clickbait, rage bait type of article. This article he writes is weird even for left-wing articles, and there's so many of these kind of digital magazines, the Slate Salon, Vox, Mike, Now This, BuzzFeed, just like a dozens of these type of things. And this was a weird article even for the left wing. So here's Brandon Sanderson, who's just seems like a nice, normal, perfectly normal person. But this guy, this Kihi guy, writes this long article, and it's worth reading the first page yourself because this is where Wired magazine is, and it's weird. I mean, it's deeply it kind of gives you kind of a raise the hairs in the back of your neck a little bit when you start looking around, because if you don't get fired for this, it doesn't say much about Wired magazine, but it also kind of makes you look at all these magazines, these digital magazines, and like they've gone fully mask off. They're just nothing more than propaganda prop pieces. So you start reading this article. So I'll scroll through the whole thing. You see how long it takes us to go through it a page at a time. And I couldn't even read the whole thing. It would take an hour to go through it. It's basically, it comes across like an angry soy boy who's mad at his dad and he's angry at the world, and just like you saw the image of him. The guy's in his 30s and he's doing this image like he's a kind of like an angsty, edgy teenager. It's weird to do. It's weird to take a picture like that as an adult. And I mean, yeah, you can draw your own conclusions. The thing is, you start reading this article, and then when you're reading the ramblings of a crazy person, you start speed reading it, and then you just start skimming the first line and last line in the paragraph because it's crazy, and it makes me wonder how well Wired magazine is doing. Is if this guy is a senior editor or something is not adding up with that. So Kihi does an interview with the fantasy author Sanderson, who comes across as just a normal person, maybe a little bit boring, who's very dedicated to writing. He's got to do it 8 hours a day. Like, he puts out a lot of content. It's like, well, the stuff doesn't write itself. That means you have to sit at a laptop for 8 hours. But he just seems like he likes to write stories that people enjoy, and he's not claiming to be Melville or London or Terry Pratchett. But those guys aren't here right now. Or Brian Jocks was good also in a different kind of vein. So, this guy will have to do. He's giving people what they enjoy and what they pay for, and he made $50 million doing it last year. And he's kind of unheard of because he's a fair-skinned person of the light, and he's a Mormon. So the mainstream media is controlled by these bad people who don't like people from like him or like you, I suspect, or like me. So he doesn't get the publicity that who's the guy who wrote Game of Thrones? I've got his book sitting on my shelf. The Game of Thrones guy, the fat guy with the beard, who's like all kind of creepy pox walks BLT degeneracy type of stuff. Like, that guy gets all the interviews on all the HBO shows, and himself is worth hundreds of millions of dollars instead of just $50 million last year. But that's what Hollywood is on board with, the creepy sexual degenerate, and not a fair-skinned Mormon guy who probably is, a family man type of guy. That's the story under the story. And to his credit, actually, he kind of talks about that while he's insulting him. I mean, the whole article comes across as like a cry for help from the writer of this, from Wired magazine. He comes across as a mentally ill San Francisco soy boy who hates himself for being so smart in such a stupid world. The guy is like got too many bumper stickers on his Prius kind of thing. But examining this really bad article, and the thing is, it's bad even for a San Francisco soy boy standard. From the other perspective, is that it's a clickbait behind a paywall article. So Wired magazine is trying to get you to subscribe to these kind of magazines, and there is stuff worth paying for online. Like there's some Odyssey channels, and there's like some Substack people, and there's some creators who you can support on subscribe. So there are a few people that are worth paying for, but it's not going to be Kotaku and BuzzFeed, because all those guys are just in the same echo chamber. None of those people on the left are over target, and most people on the right, the mainstream, the Jack Posobiec's and the Cernovics and I can't even remember all the mainstream people. I'm just so far beyond those people now. Like those guys aren't over target either, because they're not. They still have bank accounts, and they still have crowdfunding, and they still have platforms. Like those people aren't worth paying for. The salties of the world, like they're telling you the stuff that's allowed because they're not deplatformed. So like that's kind of is telling you what it's telling you. They're on all the mainstream platforms, all the mainstream payment processors. So they're telling you what the puppet masters are allowing them to tell you. Anyway, so I mean, I'm trying to say is some good stuff on Odyssey that is actually worth paying for. So it kind of makes me wonder about how well Wired Magazine is doing, if they have to do this kind of rage bait paywall type of stuff, because now there's a lot of these digital spaces that are filled. Oh, those are some beautiful hardcovers. I love, God, I love hardcover books. The thing with hardcover books is, unfortunately, the physical volume of hardcover books. I mean, that's the thing with books in general. It's like the physical volume is, you can have a house full of bookshelves and books, like even more books you can read. But eventually you run out of space, and it just, like, you have stacks of books. It gets kind of weird after a while. Anyway, the thing is, there's a lot of competition, like Kotaku, Mary Sue, CBR, all those kind of magazines, and they're all chasing the same ad dollars. And if you got to compete, and you think, oh, well, you should, here's something one of those digital magazines could do is, why don't you guys try a fair and balanced approach? Like, get some people on the right, and they look at you like it's the needle scratch on the record. Like, are you out of your effing mind? And the thing is, it would legitimately get some eyeballs if you had some right wing names, a right wing perspective on some of these magazines. But I mean, obviously, they're not going to do that. And it, kind of makes me wonder if some of the Soros money has dried up, and like the clickbait type of paywall stuff is all they have. It's just so much of this toxic far left wing angry soy boy people. But it seems like, you know what it was like after Trump. It seems like they're running out of steam. Trump was 2016 to 2020, and CNN and MSNBC went down. They're losing. Their viewership just crashed because Trump was what they're all about. But I guess I never thought about all these other Vox and Slate and Salon. They probably lost a ton of traffic, and that means you're losing a ton of ad revenue. And it's like, well, when that money disappears, it means you have to fire people or pay them less. Anyway, so he's doing this interview over a few days about a guy who's just got a normal life, and most of us are the same as this author or anyone else. They get up, they do some gardening, some walking, or some exercise, and then he writes for 4 hours, and then he takes a lunch break, and then he writes for another 4 hours, then dinner, and then he might work on notes for his stories or the business side of merchandise and crap like that. It's like, well, okay, 8 hours of writing and then probably 2 hours of the business aspect of it. It's like, what did you expect the life of an author to be about? His life is in his head, but he takes 5 months to write this long article about how much he hates Mormons and what a horrible writer and person this guy is, and how lame his family is. I mean, when I say it's a deeply, you can read the article yourself. It violates boundaries. It's creepy, and it's like, if this is the mainstream digital media nowadays, it's like children have access to this Soros venture capital money, and they're putting out these kind of articles. Also, kind of makes me realize, like, oh, you could, like, if you had some venture capital money, you could start a competitor. The thing is, you try to put a magazine out there, or like a digital information website, and you quickly realize the power of Google and DuckDuckGo and all those other search engines, especially Google, to bury the results. Where if there's a ton of, like, I don't know, Information Liberation, those are news sites, and like national type of, like, alliance or something. There's a bunch of like openly right wing perspective news sites out there. But you got to know the address yourselves, because the Google will not return those search engines results. DuckDuckGo will return them, but Google's the most used thing, search engine, and they very tightly curate. Like, what's Andrew Anglin's? He's got his own website. It's like kind of a comedy website, and it's really not a big deal. But if you search for it on Google, it's not going to come up. You go, that's kind of weird, isn't it? Isn't that like 1984 levels where the people at Google are telling us what ideas we can consume? Oh, but that's a wrong thinker site. That's deeply disturbing. Anyway, the thing is, it's not just building a site; it's the search engines and then the payment processors, and you realize like there's these hidden power structures in the world, and you would kind of hope your representatives would do something about that to make the playing field a little bit more equitable, as they say. It's like, yeah, hold your breath on that one, buddy. You're not going to vote your way out of any of this. Anyway, so as the people on Twitter were saying, is it doesn't tell you much about the fantasy writer Sanderson. It tells you that Kihi is mentally unstable. You read the article for yourself. I promise you, it's not just me saying that. The thing is, people like this Kihi guy, the angry, bitter San Francisco soy boy, their cat lady, the people who have to live in the s-hole cities that their policies created, and they claim to love the vibrant cities and the events that go on in those cities. And then, living in retail deserts because the stores close because they can't operate in such an environment. And they love it. They love those recipes. They love that vibrancy. And then they move out of San Francisco and LA to Idaho, Oregon, Washington, Texas, wherever. And then they vote the same way. And they just spread like the filthy vermin parasites that they are. I just hate them so much. So these people are adults. My dog's staring at me. You heard that, didn't you? He didn't approve. But they're not really adults. They're the Mark Wades of the world. There's a spectrum of mental stability, and most liberals are to the left in the unstable zone. But then there are people who are crossing over into the personality disorders, and that is this guy. He's not playing with the full deck, but people never really had the opportunity to see it from his Wired magazine writings, because he's writing articles about Star Wars movies or the last Matrix Part 4. I read that article about why people were just too dumb to understand it, and why the Wachowski brothers were, or I'm not sure if they're brothers anymore. Don't kick me off for saying that, YouTube. Why like the hidden message of it was actually deep, and the audience is just so stupid. But Kihi understood it, and the movie bombed for the wrong reasons because the audience is just so stupid. Like, you're just a miserable person, aren't you? And you look at a lot of these people, you realize, yeah, they really are miserable people. Anyway, they're in an echo chamber, but they stayed in an echo chamber and it didn't break out. But this article kind of broke out of his echo chamber to cover a subject like on Sanderson. Like, you can't. The thing is, listen, if I'm writing an article like this is a puff piece article. It's meant to be a puff piece. You're not hard hitting news. You're not enmeshed in North Korea or Vietnam or something. This is a puff piece article. Some articles are okay to be puff pieces. You're not meant to seriously criticize the guy. You just talk about what a lovely life he has in Utah. He's a family guy, loves his family. He's got all this cool kind of decorations in his house. And he's been wildly successful writing. It's like, it's okay to write puff pieces. It's okay. But he wrote this, like, you got to know the guy for 3 days and you just stab him in the back. And even other people on the left on Twitter were in the media and saying, like, this makes it harder for everyone else in the media who has to get interviews. Like, this is just another reason for people not to. I mean, he really stabbed this guy in the back, where even Sanderson comes out on Instagram and he says, yeah, this, like, don't get mad at this guy. He kind of can't help who he is. He didn't say that, but he said, don't get mad at the guy. But the article did hurt because he was talking about his family and he pretended to be friends with him for 3 days. And then he comes out and writes this long, bitter bit. It's a weird article, even for the Wired magazines of the world, the left-wing writers of the world. This is still a weird article. And if there was any justice, you would have been fired from Wired magazine from this, because you're just taking the cover off your mental illness and it's just like Trump's arrangement syndrome. But I guess it's you found a fantasy writer who's, I don't know if his politics, he's left-wing or right-wing. I think a lot of it is just he's Mormon and he's of European descent. And it's like, well, you can be as anti-white and anti-Christian as you want these days. And it's like, well, he found that common, like, these people, when we say the left wing are the real istophobes the whole time, that's not just a meme. They have this hatred inside them, and their globalist puppet masters tell them where they can channel this hatred. And if it became okay, if you were able to change the narrative tomorrow to take it away from this anti-white, anti-Christian stuff and point it in another direction, if the narrative changed, they'd be on board with it, because it's just this venom inside them. And if you plug one hole and you open up this other hole and say, okay, now you can take it out against the Hondurans if you want, and that's socially acceptable. The puppet masters are telling you they shine the laser pointer and it goes from like the blonde hair, blue eyed, northern Western European types, and they shine it in a different direction. They'd be fine with that. It would take a few months, and I guarantee you could get them to do it. If you against Chinese, if you wanted to, you could. You could. That's how easy they are because they don't have principles. Where the right wing more than the left wing does have principles. They do have a core dogma for different. How long is this thing? Man, this is going on. Anyway, this is let me show you the end of the article. I don't want to go on for any. This guy is going off and off about how much he hates this guy and he's Mormon. And the other weird thing I want to say about this guy is he's on Twitter, this Kihi guy, and he's got 1,800 followers on Twitter. He's been on Twitter for 13 years, and he's senior editor at Wired magazine. That is a very small number of followers. You have a social media footprint. You're a writer and an editor. You should, soon as you get on Twitter, you should have 2,000 followers in a few days, just because you're a known person with a blue check mark person. To only have 1,800 followers after 13 years, something is very wrong with you and with the message you're putting out there. Like, you're just such an abrasive, crazy, left-wing, angry soy person that nobody is able to get on board with your messaging. And like, that's the objective truth. Under 2,000 followers is freaking bizarre for a public figure. Like, you write this article, you just write a fun article. You just go have fun with the guy for 3 days. And it's a puff piece article. And like, that's okay for Wired magazine. That's okay for you. This guy is like this is pathological. And, like other people pointed out on Twitter, if it was anything other than talking about a white Christian, oh, you'd be immediately fired. You'd be blacklisted. Your life would be destroyed. But because the Sanderson guy is, just a Mormon living in Nevada or Utah or something, oh, it's open season on him. But if he was, one of the other two religions, or any other ethnicity, I don't know, assume he's English, you'd be instantly fired. As soon as the article wouldn't even get past an editor's desk, so the editor would look at him and be like, go to rehab, dude. Like, something is clearly wrong. You'd think you could write this, but because this the article still goes on, because of who Sanderson is, it's acceptable, and it's like there's no consequences for this. Anyway, globalists are not human. I think I've said that pretty often. And we need to smash globalism, smash a lot of this stuff. Anyway, thanks to the Buy Me a Coffee and the Subscribe Star people. I got a mailbox, so you can send me pocket knives, seeds for the garden, comics, gin. I don't know if you can send that through the mail. If not, and it just goes on and on. It's just, this is a bizarre, hate-filled screed. Like, I think this guy's got some legitimate mental illness. Like, you're gonna find out. He's gonna write a manifesto one day or something. That's the whole article. It's like, this is supposed to be a puff piece article on a fantasy writer. Like, you don't have to love the guy's books. I don't like fantasy in general, but I could still write I could write a puff piece article on this guy without having read a word, just by an interview with this guy. I wouldn't need to spend 3 days with the guy to do a puff piece interview. It's okay to do. It's not everything is. You're not Herman Melville, and you're not somebody who's enmeshed in Vietnam dodging 7.62 fire. You're writing about a fantasy author who himself, like, the guy's not J.R.R. Tolkien himself. He knows that. It's just freaking bizarre that this is where we are now. Anyway, this upset me enough to make a video over it. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks to everyone who's been doing stuff behind the scenes, and I'll see you guys all next episode.